the first three of 6 words. And the first 3 words that I cried out was, God, forgive me. Forgive me. And it came, as I said, from a place inside of me I hadn't been to in a long, long time. And when I no sooner got the words out than I collapsed on the steering wheel and hit my head violently, and I was gone. The next thing I'm aware of is tremendous pain on my forehead, and I sit back up, and I'm in the truck, and I'm looking out, and I know time has passed because the sun is now on the horizon as it sets. And then the realization flooded through me that I have no pain. The pain is gone. I finally got it right. You have to take the whole bottle. And I slide out of the truck, and I walk about 15 to 20 feet away, and I feel incredible. It's as though I've taken off a heavy, wet overcoat, and with it, the pain. And I feel like I'm 16 again, and I'm just overwhelmed and overjoyed. And I'm looking out at the setting sun. I can hear the birds. It's springtime. I can smell the grass. And I am just overwhelmed that the medication finally worked. And then I turn and look toward my truck. And I'm outraged. Outraged. Someone is in my truck. Not only that, he has the audacity to be sleeping on my steering wheel. And so I turn to go over there and give him a good what for. Have you ever had a dream where you're trying to run from something and it's as though your feet can't move? And I realized that as hard as I tried, my feet would only move an inch or two at a time. And I'm stunned. Why? You know, I feel so good. Why can't I just run over there and grab this guy? But I do make slow progress, and then I look up. And gentlemen, the realization that the man in the truck leaning over the steering wheel is no stranger. It is me. How can this be? I am here, and yet I'm there. How can this be? And of course, being a guy that could fix anything, and in my arrogance, I immediately concocted a scheme that if I could just get over there and get back in my body, everything will be okay. And so I struggled to get over there, and I know it's me because my head is turned this way on the steering wheel, and there's blood gushing from my mouth and nose. And I struggled to get closer to get back into my body, but suddenly I began to rise. Now, as a pilot, I'm a good judge of altitude, and as I'm rising, I'm stunned because how can this be? And I look, and now I'm drifting slowly backwards, but rising continuously. Is no stranger. It is me. How can this be? I am here, and yet I'm there. How can this be? And of course, being a guy that could fix anything, and in my arrogance, I immediately concocted a scheme that if I could just get over there and get back in my body, everything will be okay. And so I struggled to get over there, and I know it's me because my head is turned this way on the steering wheel, and there's blood gushing from my mouth and nose. And I struggled to get closer to get back into my body, but suddenly I began to rise. Now, as a pilot, I'm a good judge of altitude, and as I'm rising, I'm stunned because how can this be? And I look, and now I'm drifting slowly backwards, but rising continuously. And I can look down and see the bed of my truck, see my toolbox, and I'm stunned. I rise a little higher, and then something made me look up instead of down, because I could see the surrounding area. I could look through the back window of the truck. I could see my body sloped over the wheel. And then I turn and I look up. And there, right in front of me, is this golden circle. It's maybe 200 feet away. It's about 60 feet in diameter. And it's like a golden wedding ring. And then suddenly the center of it filled with a golden light. And I had the impression that it swung inwards and backwards like the door of an old-fashioned safe. And immediately my body went into a reclining position of about 45 degrees. And I mean, unless you've lived under a rock in a cave, I think everyone has heard of the tunnel of light. But I never paid any attention to it. And suddenly I began to go forward toward this tunnel of light. And as I went through the ring, I could see what was an immense distance, and all of it covered with cloud that was golden, but a distinct path through the center. And it seemed, once I realized what this was, it was as though I had pushed the throttles on an L-1011 forward on to achieve V1 on to takeoff. And I felt this tremendous force of speed. And I went at tremendous speed into this tunnel of light, reclining backwards about 45 degrees. And to give you an idea of the speed, I could feel the stars streaming by, see the stars streaming by. I mentioned that in Baltimore one night when I was speaking. There was a young guy in the front row, and he said, sounds like the opening of the Star Trek to me. And that's a pretty good analogy. It was the stars streaming by. And I was terrified because being a technical person, always understanding why things were happening, wanting to learn, I was absolutely baffled. There was no rationale, no technical reason I could attach to this. And the other thing that I remember vividly was that when you're going fast, whether you're in your convertible or in a speedboat or on your motorbike, you hear the rush of the wind. You hear the noise of the air. Nothing. Complete silence. And yet the sensation of tremendous speed.
And so, Jim, you just said you were in a kind of a place where you're kind of terrified and scared. Did you enter further into the light and immediately encounter Jesus or angels, or was there a darkness that tried to pull you in first?
I suddenly became aware of a bright light at the end of the tunnel that was even lighter than the tunnel. And as I came toward it, I decelerated and came up upright. And I find myself facing, I still don't know whether to call it a door or a portal. It's covered in mist. But I do know I have no choice because I sense that the tunnel is closing behind me. And so I step through this mist-covered portal and gingerly put one foot inside because I cannot see what I'm stepping onto, and felt something firm. I brought my other foot in. I look down, the mist starts to clear, and I'm stunned because I'm looking at the most perfect green grass I've ever seen. Each blade beautiful in its symmetry and its evenness. I now know what they mean by the grass is always greener on the other side. They're talking about heaven. And then the mist clears in front of me. I look up, and to my right, there's this beautiful mist lifting off this field, and the field is covered in flowers of so many colors, and colors that I have no name for. And I mean, I've traveled on every 52 countries in the world. I've been in the most beautiful places, and nothing compared to this. And I'm stunned by the beauty of it and the rolling fields, and it seemed to go on forever. And this beautiful vault of a darker blue sky than we're used to here on Earth, but no sun. Because as a pilot, I was trying to orient myself, and I thought if I could find the sun, I'd know in my southeast, southwest. No sun. Everything seemed to generate a light that created this fusion of color. And then I swung my vision to the left, and as I left that beautiful vista on the right, the grass went from green to brown to black to scorched. And I was really taken by looking for the technical reason. Why would there be this dichotomy between these two vistas? And that darkness continued to the left and into what seemed to be a crevasse. And I guess I'm just naturally inquisitive. I made a few tentative steps to the left to see what was beyond this chasm. And as I looked down, and it was as though the walls of this chasm were covered with a shiny black coal, anthracite. And as I looked down, the first thing I saw was at the very pit of the bottom of this abyss was a fire, a red fire, as though you would glimpse a campfire in a distant valley. And but I was caught by the difference, and not only that, there was a sense of gloom, a miasma. I've learned a sense of dread. I think ever since we crawled out of caves, we've always feared the darkness. And so I started to turn away from this, but then something happened. The fire became greater at the bottom. And as I'm looking down, two things happened. The brightness of the fire increased, and I realized that down and looking sideways, it was as though a door had opened, a large door. And I could hear a sound for the first time. And the sound was the sound of two large doors being forced open on hinges that had not been oiled, and you could hear them screeching and so on, and just rusty. And of course that flooded more light, so I realized the light was coming from the side to the bottom. And then, to my utter amazement, something shuffled out of that doorway. The doorway was huge, and so was the creature that came out. And I'm looking down on it, and it appeared to have a form, large, round. It was on fire. Its body was on fire. Its head was squat on its shoulders, and it seemed to be searching around the bottom of this pit for something. And then suddenly it was as though it became aware of me, and it swiveled its head around and looked up at me. And fellas, I can tell you something. The look of hatred that I saw in its glowing eyes, not just for me, but for all of mankind, will stay with me forever. On top of that, there was an odor that came out of that pit, a sense of decay, a sense of all things bad, as I said, a miasma. And I turned because I couldn't bear to look at it. But just the second before I turned, it began to scramble up the sides of that pit. Now, for its size, it was large. It moved with an amazing nimbleness. And it crawled very rapidly up the side of that pit. And I scrambled backwards, falling backwards on my elbows. And it reared up out of the pit. And I was confronted by this creature, body on fire, dripping saliva, and the most horrendous face. But the other thing was, there was screaming. And the screaming was coming not from its mouth. The screaming appeared to be coming from within the body. It was as though this creature, Randy, had consumed souls, and they were crying out for mercy. And it stepped out of the pit and lumbered toward me. And to keep my sanity, I scrambled to my feet and turned my back to it. And remember I said there's 6 words? I said the first 3, God forgive me. And then I turned and I turned toward the beautiful light, and I raised both hands, and this time I cried out the next 3 words. 3 words that I had never prayed in my life. God, help me. Help me. And instantly, 3 points of light appeared in the beautiful cerulean blue sky, converging toward me. One was coming from about 90 degrees, the other one from about 260, and the other one from about 310. And all converging into one. At the same time, this creature is behind me. And then, in addition to the screaming, I heard it speak my name. This creature knew me. It knew me. I wasn't that bad a person. I may not have gone to church, but I was not. What did I do to deserve this? All these thoughts were racing through my mind. And I gave to the poor if there was a tax receipt. But what did I do to deserve this? And it had a strange voice. It was in between a growl and a whisper. And I could hear it saying, Jim, we are here for you. We are here for you. Join us. Come to us. And I honestly believe that had I turned at that moment and looked into its face, I would have been snatched. But instead I concentrated on this beautiful light coming toward me. And all of a sudden the lights fused together, and I'm looking at this light traveling toward me, and the light washed over me, and at that point I turned to look back. And Randy, when that light struck that creature, it screeched and screamed in agony and scrambled backwards like a rat running for cover. Darkness and evil cannot live in the light of God. It must not live. Very